Hi, I'm Keith McCullough, and welcome back to another edition of Real Conversations, where it's my pleasure to have John Mauldin, who's the chairman of Mauldin Economics. He's well known. You guys probably have a lot of questions for him. We're going to let you ask those questions. Definitely, I'm going to get to ask the first one, though, here, John, first, so thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good to be with you, by the way, Keith.
Yeah, it's good.
Love you guys. Love your work.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. We love yours too, and your audience. You have like one of the most brilliant audiences I can find out there. They're really into what you're doing.
My readers are really sharp and smart. I will agree with you there.
I like that. First thing I wanted to ask you was more of a personal thing on starting thoughts from the front line. And again, this audience is very well aware of what that is, but I was quite curious in terms of what got you to get up in the morning and get after that, because it's been a great piece of or compendium of work, really.
At the beginning, I've been a writer since high school and college, and at the very beginning of it, it was a way for me to kind of organize my thoughts. It was a little shorter. It was, what have I read this week? There wasn't an online, a lot of information. There were books, there were magazines, there was the library. And so I began to write my letter. And in 2000, I had a few thousand email names. So I started sending this letter to those email names, and it just took off. Back then, nobody did a free letter, so everybody forwarded it to everybody else. Everybody subscribed. That was the one thing I did, was I said, if you want to continue to get my letter, if you want to read past 4 paragraphs, you've got to give me your email address. And back then, nobody thought that there was anything to giving somebody an email address, because we weren't inundated with information. Today, it would be a lot harder for a new kid on the block to start up. But it still is. This is what I've read this week. This is what's on the top of my mind. And its focus has changed and drifts over the years, but it's still, what am I reading now? What am I thinking about?
That's fantastic. I mean, because a lot of people, as you know, they don't actually read. Reading things it is still at this day and age is a differentiated concept. But I think what you do a great job of is contextualizing what you read.
A great deal.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and people really don't always have a historical context to refer their current opinion on, and you certainly have a lot of those. The one that I think is most interesting right now, if only because you coined it, I think you coined it, which is quantitative tightening, or QT. Did you coin that? And if you did, what can you just kind of explain to people who don't know what that is and just walk through your thoughts?
I don't believe I coined that, though I picked it up pretty quickly. I forget who I first read it from. But it's the opposite of quantitative easing. And when they begin to take that money off the table, they're trying to tell us that it's not going to have the same effect that it had when they put it on the table. The Federal Reserve now is kind of wondering, scratching their head, where's the inflation? Well, the inflation is in asset prices. And for them to think that they can do a QT, even though it's going to be graduated and is going to increase over time, and for it not to have an effect on asset prices, I think is unrealistic. I think it is unwise in the extreme to do both quantitative tightening and raising rates at the same time. I mean, honestly, really, they should have been raising rates 4 years ago. This economy could handle another 50 bips in low-end interest rates. I think that's probably where they would be anyway. They might be ooching up a little bit closer to 2% if we keep seeing 3% GDP numbers. Mm-hmm. But we're in a low interest rate environment naturally for a long time, I think. The economy is, and anticipating the question that's always there, inflation versus deflation. The economy is naturally deflationary. The world is producing more stuff, if you will, at lower costs. Mm-hmm. I mean, this week in my letter, I showed a graph that showed the rather significant growth in the number of oil rigs being used in the U.S. And it compared it to the fact that the number of oil workers on rigs are beginning to decline. And that's because on rigs, there's now something called an iron roughneck that will eventually replace 15 out of the 20 workers that are needed on the rigs to put those pipes into the ground. And it is I've been on those rigs when they're doing it. It's nasty, dangerous, dirty, and if you're in the Bakken during winter, it's cold.
So technology, innovation, productivity, that all makes sense. How about the demographic side? I know that you and Neil Howe are friends, and he works alongside us here. How well understood do you think the demographic forces are as a deflationary force relative to to the consensus that we're going to have some kind of worldwide breakout in inflation?
I don't think people get it. I mean, honestly, it's counterintuitive. And if you look back, what's been our experience now for 40 years? I mean, the boomers, the Gen X, we have inflation. I mean, you're not old enough to remember, Keith, but some of us lived through 18% inflation in the U.S. And I would, 21% prime rates. It was, a scarring moment. And to watch inflation come down over years, it was still, it came down from the high, the high teens to the mid-teens to the low teens. And Greenspan was still fighting inflation in the 90s. And shoving against it, trying to bring it down. And it wasn't really until this last global recession that we began to see deflationary forces and seeing inflation disappear. And that's happening for several reasons. Number one, we're seeing the velocity of money just fall out of bed. But that's not since the Great Recession. The velocity of money started falling slowly during the middle of the presidency of George W. Bush. So this is an economic force that is going to continue as the country gets older. If you look at the amount of quantitative easing that the Bank of Japan has done, I mean, just magnitudes more than what we've done in the U.S., and inflation there is almost non-existent. They've been living in a deflationary economy for 20 plus years. The nominal GDP of their country is not much different than it was 25 years ago. And that's a big deal. Now, we're in the U.S. somewhat a reflection of that 25 years ago as we are starting to age ourselves. Europe, especially some of the countries in Europe like Italy, Spain, and others that have just a real lack of births. So they're aging, they're getting older, and they're going to see this deflationary pressure as well.
Italy's a great call out, John. We'll show a chart right now that shows the population growth rate of 35 to 55-year-olds, and we showed across the world, but Italy's actually, maybe, and not surprising to you, but maybe surprising to some, that'll be getting older faster than any civilized economy for the next 5 years. They're going to have negative population growth rate, John, of basically 2% for the next 5 years, which is just the most daunting statistic to me, or at least in terms of a forward-looking statistic. And I wonder if anybody agrees on the deflationary risk, is it not Draghi and the Europeans? Do you think that they get it? I thought that he was relatively dovish last week.
They really expected inflation to come back when they started printing money. And
Right.
then they printed more, and then they printed more. It's not technically printing. They're buying assets and so forth. But it's the same effect. It's shoving euros into their economy. And there's no inflation. I mean, there's some asset price inflation, but what you have is boomers. You get to be 50, 55 years old, you've bought most of the stuff, the big stuff, the big ticket stuff that you want. You're not going out and buying that fast red car unless you're, 50 years old, single for some reason, and trying to relive your youth.
If you're my age, John, if you're 42 and you got 4 kids, I mean, I know you have, I think you have 7, so you get it. But then your sports car's gone. It turns into something that that somebody else is going to drive.
Mine's an Infiniti SUV, and I'm perfectly happy with it. And in fact, I don't drive that much at all anymore. My kids are all out of the house. We're empty nesters, and the reality is that I've got less than, on a 6-year-old car, less than 45,000 miles.
Wow.
I'm not going to be buying a car for another 5, 7, 8 years. And when I do, it'll probably be some type of electric vehicle, SUV, a little bit smaller, and automated driving. I will be an early adopter of automatic driving. I mean, I'm one of those guys that's honest when they ask you the question, are you a better than average driver? And 80% of the people say yes. I'm one of the 20% that admit that the world would be safer if I wasn't on the road. Because I just start daydreaming. And, God, you lose situational awareness. That's the worst thing in the world. I cannot wait. I let Shane drive most of the time. I mean, I can't wait to have a car that I get into the car and say, James, take me here. And it does.
But these things, as you know, become a much bigger problem when the economy slows. How do you think about that when you see some of these big balance sheet issues, pension crisis pending? I mean, it's ongoing. It's not pending. How do you think about that in terms of timing? Do you get a lot of questions on it? Because it's a lot easier to see these warts and implosions once we're on the backside of an economic cycle, is it not?
Oh, it is. And when we see the next recession, I don't know where that is. Economy just seems to be doing fine. I'd just assume we not see a recession for a very long time. But when we see the next recession, you'll probably see, what happens is the assets of those pensions shrink because they've got a lot of them in stocks.
Right.
And now they become even more unfunded and underfunded. And it just starts cascading on itself. And you start seeing severe problems in California and in many, many states. I think because of the debt that we have in this country, public, private, all combined together, that the recovery is going to, after the next recession, it's going to be even slower.
Yeah.
And that's because debt has a drag is a drag on growth. Mm-hmm. There's no question about it. All the data points that way. So it's going to make those problems even more severe. And, maybe it's 2019, 2022, something like, whenever you begin to see this. I mean, here's what's going to happen sometime in the 2022 and after. You're going to start seeing automated cars come in. And the adoption curve is going to be like every technological adoption curve we've ever seen. It starts off slow, it goes up, and then it hits a tipping point, and it goes up like this and then balances off. Anyway, I'm writing about this tech spread. Rethink X, which is a little bit over the top in their report, but they're talking about the number of cars going from 2020 being manufactured in the U.S. to 18 million, that by 2030 it'll be 5.6 million. Maybe to 2035, and I'd be a little bit more comfortable with that, but that's what's going to happen. We're going to be buying many, many, many less cars. That all those jobs are going to wait. All the taxi and the truck driver jobs are, not all of them, but many of them are going away. We don't get rid of all our cars. If you're in rural America, you're going to need a car. The transportation to service is not going to work very well for you. But we're going to need It's going to change the way we build our roads. It's going to change the way we think about highways and localities. But it's going to change the nature of emergency rooms. 30 million people die less, then you're not going to need as many insurance agents, because you're going to get whoever owns the car that's driving it as a service gets the insurance, and they're buying it from a big company. I mean, this is going to be a massive implosion of jobs, which I see really is the ultimately large crisis starting in the middle of the next decade, as we begin to see jobs just disappear. And we as a country are not prepared for massive unemployment on a scale that is going to hit the big cities just as much as it hits small rural America when, you know, the main company in town leaves.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that timeline, I mean, it's hard to implement that in terms of portfolios, but the reality is that if you look at the inevitability of an economic cycle slowdown, that is indeed going to happen. At some point, we're going to have to say, even if it's in 2018, 2019, in the next 3 to 5 years, what you're saying effectively is that technology, productivity runs into the cycle, and that's when all the really deflationary forces become readily apparent.
The whole cycle, everything I was talking about, is massively deflationary. We're getting older. We're becoming more productive. The more productive you get, that means you're producing more stuff for less cost.
Yep.
And if you don't charge less, your competitor will, and you're going to have to keep driving your costs down to maintain market share. I mean, Amazon's deflationary. Yeah. You know, I mean, they just are.
Yeah, obviously.
They're forcing all of the brick and mortar stores to drop their costs. Yeah. Walmart's deflationary. That's just what happens.
Now, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you some questions from your Million Man movement, Million Man, and this is
a lot of women, and I met a 13-year-old reader last weekend. So thank you very much.
I heard it's 90% women that follow you, John. That's just I heard that.
I tell people all the time that I've got groupies anywhere I go in the world. My problem is they're 50-year-old white guys.
Well, oh, geez. I mean, let's just stop with that. Here's a good question, and this is an interesting one that most people don't ask people, but it's certainly a big industry, and it certainly represents a lot of baby boomers and what you coined the only asset inflation, which is, you know, stocks, bonds, and other. You know, what key risks do you think there are going to be in the FA and the RIA world?
I got good news and I got bad news. Let's see how I can say. The bad news is that half of them are going to lose their jobs. They're going to go away in the next 10 years.
Oh, boy.
The good news is the other half that figure out how to get ahead of the curve, figure out how to not do the same old thing that they've been doing in the past, are going to be able to pick up market share, and their books, the money under management that they have, is going to grow. Now, so all you've got to do is figure out how not to be a buy and hold. We're going to do the same thing we've been doing for the last 50-year advisor, how to get ahead of the curve, how to have dynamic portfolios.
And maybe a final question on that. Like, how do you, and there's like 3 different ways people have asked this question. Like, when you get up in the morning, how do you track financial market risk? And when would you give a tap on the shoulder to the group of people that you're working with on your portfolios?
Actually, I pay them to get up in the morning and to assess risk. I'm just going to be blunt with you here, okay?
No, it's a full-time job. You need a team doing it. I agree with you.
Oh God, and they've got big teams.
Yeah.
And these aren't one-man operations. They've got teams of people sitting around, researching, writing, thinking, writing these algorithms, playing with them. And
I think people wake up, John, like the way that they wake up, the people asking the question this way, and it's no offense meant to them whatsoever. They live in the old wall world where they believe George Soros would wake up in the morning and just change his mind. You know, it's just a very different when they.
And I don't know how George operates, but when I have talked to people that have worked with him and for him, I've talked to people that manage his agricultural properties, for instance. What people don't realize that he's one of the largest, if not the largest, landowners and ag producers in South America. That's not waking up one morning and deciding I think I'm just going to go out and short the British pound. When they made those decisions, they talked about it, they bounced it around, they researched it. There was a lot of thought and effort and background that went on it, just like your clients and the hedge funds that you guys work with do. I mean, sometimes we as individuals wake up and we get a bell that goes off on our heads says we should buy or sell, some emotion. I mean, maybe we had the wrong Italian sausage the last night. That's not the way professionals run their money. And I actually tell people that I think 97% of people should have a professional run their money, and they shouldn't be doing it. I mean, I have professionals running my money, and people think I know what I'm doing, and they think I've got my pulse on the market. I know myself well enough that other than choosing managers, I shouldn't be choosing investments. I choose managers which choose investments for me. Right. And I'm real comfortable with my ability to choose managers. I've gotten good at it over the decades. But you don't want me looking at a trading screen trying to decide, am I going to buy the flashing red one because it's gone down 7%? I don't have the stomach for that, nor the ability, nor the skill set.
I think with experience comes humility, especially when we're talking about markets. So that's, I'm sure everyone very much appreciates
it. A man's got to know his limitations.
Yes, indeed. Last question. I can't believe I have to ask this question, but it's coming through in the queue. The GOP, and again, to preface this, John, I am Canadian. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. Okay?
You're asking me a political question.
What is the future of the GOP? I've had 3 different people have asked that question. I guess they think you know.
Okay, full disclosure. I was on the executive committee for the Republican Party for 20 years here in Texas.
Well, that's why they're asking.
I've done a lot of big fundraisers. I've worked with big campaigns, small city council campaigns. I understand the process. With this last election, I no longer understand what is going on. I've talked with friends of mine around the country. We're clueless. There is something happening in the U.S. that is a cultural shift. And I don't think Trump was the culmination of that shift. I think he's the harbinger. He's the beginning. Mm-hmm. As we see more and more jobs begin to disappear in the face of automation, as we see more and more people's retirements being threatened, they're going to get frustrated. Bernie Sanders, if he had been in a Republican style nominating process, i.e. Hillary Clinton had 800 superdelegates that were in her bag when she started out. Okay, the Republicans, it's one man, one vote. Bernie Sanders may very well have won the nomination in that type of one man, one vote process. The Democrats don't understand what their future is. Both political party elites are clueless. They think they understand where the levers of power are, and the levers of power out in the votes, out in the precincts, are shifting. Let's look at what happened in France with Macron. If you'd gone back 2 years before their election, you said there's going to be somebody coming out of the center party that's going to run for president and not only win, but he's going to get people in every one of their districts to run for their parliament. And he's going to take a massive, overwhelming lead. People would have laughed at you. But he devastated both the political left and the political right, the parties that had been sharing power for 70 years. To think that can't happen in the U.S., you're not paying attention. The party elites think they still understand what's going on. They don't. The frustration in America is palpable. Right now, they want their political leaders to fix things, which means make their life better. And the problem is politicians can't even fix the problems we have, let alone the problems that we're going to have, let alone the problems that are frustrating these people. This massive opioid crisis, but it's also suicide and death from alcohol in 45 to 50-year-old whites who've basically given up hope. They've lost their jobs. They're trying to numb their pain. That's growing. That's a crisis, and it's the opioid deaths and the opioid use is a symptom, not a cause. And I think we need to recognize in the United States that this social upheaval could be very, very serious. Is likely to be the driver in politics and society for a while. And we're going to have to start thinking the unthinkable. Well, we're going to have to start thinking about answering age-old questions in completely different ways. And it may offend, as I wrote in my letter, it may offend every Hayekian neuron in my brain, but we've got to start asking, how do we solve this emotional and sociological need when we're going to see jobs begin to disappear because of technology? Mm-hmm. We just can't tell these people, well, go down the road, too bad. This is going to be so significant and so across the board impactful that we're going to have to figure out how to address this need. I mean, maybe we do something like guaranteed full employment. I mean, for me to even say those words it offends me. Not guaranteed basic income. Giving somebody an income doesn't give them fulfillment. We have to figure out how to help people find fulfillment, to get meaning and purpose in life. And that's generally what comes from your job, from participating in society. So we'll figure that out.
Well, it's a lot easier for people to try to figure it out when these topics are on the front line. So we really appreciate this. I think that the bigger picture here is that you're constantly flashing a light on these longer term issues. And to your point, the only way that you're going to survive is through an education here. And again, right. Going all the way back to when you started, I guess, in 2001 with the front line, you're still on it. And I think everybody's pretty happy about that. So thank you.
And I intend to be doing it for a long time to come.
That's great. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it, John.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Keith.
He's John Mauldin. I'm Keith McCullough. You can find him on Twitter, actually, as well. But again, sign up for his newsletter. You'll quite enjoy all these topics. He goes into depth about all of them.